Hello, good morning. So we're going to continue on with this standard with make sure you go to CPOMs and do the lesson there. It is very helpful. Make sure you're taking very good notes. For this standard in particular, I'm going to be analyzing and describing how and why organisms are classified according to the shared characteristics, with emphasis on the Linnaeus system combined with the concept of domains. So it's pretty much explaining why we are categorizing all these different types of animals that are around the world and how we group them together. So it is estimated that there is an approximately 8.7 million species of organisms on the planet, with thousands more discovered each day. A species is just a group of similar organisms that mate with each other and produce offspring that can also mate and reproduce. Biologists place similar organisms into groups based on characteristics they have in common. Classification is the process of grouping things based on the similarities. To classify the organism, you'd first need to know about its characteristics. Then you could figure out what group it is belonged to. So you're looking at characteristics like fur color, the shape of the mouth, what they eat, the shape of their beak, if they have claws or not, if they have webbed feet. Things like that would be the characteristics that you'd be looking for to put it into a specific classification system and to find out what species it is. So in the 1730s, biologist Carolus Linnaeus arranged organisms in groups based on their observable features. Then he gave each organism a two-part scientific name. The first word of the name is an organism's genus, a group of similar, closely related organisms. The second word is a species and might describe where the organism lives or its appearance. The system within each organism is given a unique two-part scientific name that indicates its genus, and its species is known as binomial nomenclature. Today, scientists still use this naming system that classifies organisms according to their shared characteristics. So every single animal on this planet is going to have this two-word scientific name that is going to be corresponding directly to the binomial nomenclature that scientists are going to be using to classify them and to name them. The scientific study of how organisms are classified is called taxonomy. Scientists use taxonomy to identify the name of the unknown organisms or to name a newly discovered organism. For example, if you look closely at the characteristics of the organisms, such as a wolf, for example, you might classify it as one of these. You might classify it as a sea slug. It would then be simple to look up sea slug and find out that they are animals related to slugs or snails. All sea slugs have sensitive tentacles that they use to smell, taste, and feel their way around. They eat other animals by scraping away their flesh. Sea slugs can even gain the ability to sting by eating stinging animals. So this one is a slug that is on land, but there are sea slugs that are, of course, in the water. And depending on what they eat, they can actually sting you. So if they eat animals that have toxins in their body, let's say not necessarily a jellyfish, but that would be a good example, then they would be able to sting just like them because they would take those toxins out of the organisms that they're eating and they would be using them for their own benefit. In classification of organisms, the broadest level of organization is the domain. There are three domains: Eukarya, Archaea, and bacteria. Eukarya includes the familiar kingdoms of plant, animal, and fungi, and a less familiar kingdom, Protista, which was much simpler organisms. Members of domain Eukarya are called eukaryotes. Eukaryotes have nuclei containing DNA. Domain Archaea contains groups of one-celled organisms with no nuclei in their cells. Members of the domain bacteria, like Archaea, have only one cell and no nucleus, but bacteria have different structures and chemical processes than those of Archaea. So it's just telling us what kingdom or what domain it is. So it's telling us whether it's a plant, whether it's an animal, a fungi, if they have a nucleus, things like that. So remember, not all organisms are going to have this membrane-bound nucleus. It is just pretty much for multicellular organisms that mostly have this nucleus or this membrane-bound nucleus. That is very important. Just like we see here, we have this bacteria okay? But then inside of you looking at the DNA, or per se, it's not going to have a particular nucleus. It's just going to be floating. So inside this bacteria, or this one right here, you're going to just see DNA floating around pretty much. As explained at the start of this lesson, the first word in an organism's scientific name is in genus. The genus is a classification grouping of similar, closely related organisms. Each genus contains one or more species. The more classification levels two organisms share, the more characteristics they have in common, and the more closely related they are. If you look at the figures that I put here, these are all known as giant puffball mushrooms found in the genus Calvatia. Another closely related kind of puffball is also called Calvatia. The giant puffball species name Gigantea describes its size. The giant puffball species named Giatia describes its size. So remember that. That's very important. So remember, one thing is telling us that it's a puffball. The other one is telling us that it's giant. As you see here, the man in this figure is using its arm length to see how big it is, and it's pretty big for this sort of species. Together, the two words identify the genus and the species of the scientific name. So, for example, this one is called Calvatia craniformis. So, cranny means kind of like a cranium, like the part of your head. So it looks, if you look at it, it's kind of like it looks like a hard exterior, kind of like if your brain was in it. That's why it has all of these little lines. So it's referring to the cranium. Then we have this one, which is the Calvatia gigantea, which is just a giant puffball, pretty much. And then we have this one that's called Lycoperdum echitum, that has all these little pointy things on it, but they're all puffballs. They just have different names because their characteristics are a little different. Our complete scientific name is written in italics. The first letter in the first word is capitalized. You use Latin in the naming system because it was the most common language used by all scientists back in the day. Different common names for the same organism can get confusing, so scientists also use taxonomic keys, as shown, to help name and identify organisms. For example, so this is a taxonomic key. Okay, so let's say it has body covered in feathers. Okay, so if we have a yes for that, okay, so we go to step 3 over here. Can it swim? If it can swim, so if it's covered in feathers and it can swim, it's most likely a duck. If it's covered in feathers but it cannot swim, it might be a hawk. Or has the body covered in dry, scaly skin? Yes, okay. So does it have legs? It might be an alligator. If it has no legs, it can be a snake. So they also use this taxonomic key because it's very easy to read, and the organism name is going to be on this right-hand side, depending on what it is. All right, so Charles Darwin is extremely important for this unit. He's all about evolutionary patterns and things like that. So when Linnaeus was alive, people thought the species never changed. This point of view changed when Charles Darwin developed a new idea in the 1830s. Darwin was an Englishman. He sailed around the world for 5 years observing nature and collecting samples of fossils and animals. During the voyage, he was fascinated by the relationships between modern species and ancient types. Darwin was also one of the first scientists to understand evolution, or the process of gradual change over time. He concluded that all modern species developed from earlier kinds of life through natural selection. Natural selection is the idea that some individuals are better adapted to their environment than others. The better adapted individuals are more likely to survive and reproduce than other members of the same species. So he's pretty much saying that some members of a population, so let's say humans a little different. Let's say sharks, for example. Some populations of sharks are going to be better adapted to their environment, so they're going to be able to live longer. So, for example, let's say a white shark, or the great white shark. It is very popular, and it's very aggressive per se, so it's going to have a higher chance of reproducing and evolve, because it is able to find food relatively quickly, which is good. So it's going to be better adapted. Let's say another kind of shark that lives very deep below, and it can't find a source of food. So that's what it means. So just some individuals of that same population are going to be finding things, finding food, finding shelter that make them better able to survive their environment than the rest. Evolution by natural selection is the organizing principle of life science. Evidence from thousands of scientific investigations support the idea of evolution. As understanding of evolution increases, biologists change how they classify species. Scientists now understand that certain organisms may be similar because they share a common ancestor and an evolutionary history. The more similar the two groups are, in fact, the more recent their common ancestor. So, for example, if you're looking at this, right, they have a common ancestor. So human, lizard, cat, whale, bat, frog, and bird, they actually all have the same bone structures. So they might not look the same at all, but for example, they're going to have the same hand bones. They're going to have the same arm bones also. So we see here, for example, we see a bat, right? And we see a human. So you can tell the bat technically has like these 5 fingers, but it's obviously going to be like webbed so it could fly. But it still has these 5 main bone structures like we do. A whale does too, but it's covered in the flipper. But it doesn't matter. The point is that the bone structures are the same, so we can say that they have a common ancestor. Now, does that mean that we evolved technically from like a whale, or we came from a lizard? Not necessarily. We're just saying that in our past life, we're coming from a similar ancestor where we evolved from. Scientists determine the evolutionary history of a species by comparing the structures of organisms. Scientists also compare the genetic information contained in the DNA of organism cells. Sometimes unrelated organisms that live in similar environments evolve similar characteristics. Sharing common characteristics, however, does not necessarily mean that organisms are closely related. The process by which unrelated organisms evolve similar characteristics is called convergent evolution. When scientists discovered convergent evolution, they had to change the placement of organisms within the classification system. Because scientific research leads to discovery and new knowledge, scientists sometimes reclassify organisms to account for new evidence. In this sense, the system of classification also evolves. So remember, we are finding new animals every single day. Okay, so of course, animals are going to be evolving. There's going to be new species, but also we are going to also be evolving in our classification system because we're gaining new knowledge every single day. So converging evolution is just 2 organisms that are not related. So for example, we have a bird over here and we have a dragonfly over here. They are not related at all, but they both were able to evolve wings because they needed to fly. Maybe they were trying to get away from predators. Something came up. So that's what convergent evolution, maybe they grew up in the same area, not related, but they both have wings. They both evolved this trait or this characteristic. So that's all it's saying. So remember, make sure you're taking very good notes on this. Make sure you're using seed palms effectively. Make sure you're watching all the YouTube videos that I attach also. I'm going to pause here. Make sure you're also studying your notes so you do very well on the lesson check questions, quizzes, and things like that. The quarter is actually almost over, so keep going. We only have a couple more weeks left, and you guys are done. Thank you.